Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are standing before an ancient mirror, its surface rippled with age, its frame carved with symbols you cannot read. You lean closer, expecting to see your reflection, but something is wrong. The face staring back at you is yours, and yet it is not. The eyes are the same color, the features familiar, but there is something in the expression, something in the way this mirror self holds itself that feels like a stranger. You step back. The reflection steps back. You raise your hand. The reflection raises its hand. Every movement matches perfectly, and yet the feeling remains. This is not truly you. Or is it? What if I told you that this ancient mirror exists not in some forgotten temple, but within the architecture of your own mind? What if the greatest deception you will ever encounter is not perpetrated by another person, by society, or by some external force, but by you against yourself? Welcome, traveler, to the labyrinth of denial and self-deception. You stand at its entrance now, and I must warn you. Once we step inside, nothing will look quite the same again. The ground beneath your certainties will shift. The walls of your identity will reveal hidden doors. And the monster at the center of this maze, it wears your face. But before we descend into this psychological underworld, let us stand here at the threshold and ask the question that has haunted philosophers, poets, and scientists for millennia. Why do we lie to ourselves? Not the small, forgivable lies we tell to spare someone's feelings, but the profound, structural lies that shape our entire perception of reality. The lies that determine who we think we are, what we believe we want, and how we understand our place in the world. Socrates declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what he did not say, what perhaps he could not bring himself to admit, is that examination itself is the most terrifying act a human being can undertake. Because to truly look at yourself, without the protective layers of story and justification, without the comforting narratives that make your choices seem inevitable and your character seem coherent, this is to risk discovering that the person you thought you were may be nothing more than an elaborate fiction, a character you have been playing for so long that you have forgotten you are acting. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of self-knowledge, gnothi seauton, know thyself. These words were inscribed at the temple of Apollo at Delphi, where seekers came from across the known world to consult the oracle. But here is what we often forget. The oracle spoke in riddles. Truth, even when offered directly, arrives wrapped in mystery. And self-knowledge? It is the most riddling truth of all. Consider this. Right now, in this moment, you believe certain things about yourself. You believe you are a good person, or at least trying to be. You believe your decisions are rational, your emotions justified, your memories accurate. You believe that if someone pointed out a significant flaw in your thinking, you would be able to see it, acknowledge it, perhaps even thank them for bringing it to your attention. You believe you are fundamentally honest, especially with yourself. But what if all of these beliefs are part of the deception? What if the very mechanism you trust to tell you the truth about yourself is the same mechanism that has been carefully constructed to hide that truth from you? This is not philosophy for the sake of intellectual games. This is about something far more urgent, the way we navigate reality itself. Every decision you make, every relationship you form, every goal you pursue, every fear you carry, all of it is filtered through the lens of self-perception. And if that lens is warped, if it has been systematically designed to show you a version of yourself that is more palatable, more heroic, more coherent than the truth, then you are not really living your life. You are living a story about your life, and the author of that story is your unconscious mind, working tirelessly to protect you from something it has decided you cannot bear to see. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying human cognition and won a Nobel Prize for demonstrating something both elegant and disturbing. We are not nearly as rational as we think we are. Our minds are not logic machines that occasionally make errors. They are story-making machines that occasionally stumble into truth. We do not see reality and then interpret it. We construct a version of reality that makes sense to us, that fits our existing beliefs, that protects our ego from the unbearable weight of uncertainty and contradiction. But Kahneman's work, brilliant as it is, only scratches the surface of something far more profound and far more ancient. Long before modern psychology mapped the territories of cognitive bias and motivated reasoning, long before neuroscience revealed the mechanisms of self-deception at the neural level, human beings understood that we are, at our core, creatures who hide from ourselves. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving stories, the hero king refuses to accept his mortality until his beloved friend dies in his arms. He embarks on an impossible quest for immortality, driven not by courage but by denial, the denial that he too will return to dust. In the Buddhist tradition, the concept of Maya, illusion, describes not merely the deceptions of the external world, but the fundamental delusion that creates the sense of a separate, permanent self. In psychoanalysis, Freud built an entire architecture of the mind around the idea that our conscious awareness is just a small island floating on an ocean of repressed desires, forgotten traumas, and forbidden thoughts. What all of these traditions recognize in their different languages is that self-deception is not a bug in human consciousness. It is a feature. It is perhaps the feature that defines us as a species. We are the animal that can lie to itself and believe it. We are the creature that can look directly at evidence that contradicts our most cherished beliefs and not only dismiss it, but transform it into confirmation of what we already knew. We are the beings who can commit acts of cruelty and call them kindness, who can destroy what we love and call it protection, who can spend our entire lives running from a truth so obvious that everyone around us can see it while we remain blind. And the most extraordinary part? We do all of this not out of weakness, but out of a profound psychological necessity. Self-deception is not the opposite of survival. It is one of the primary tools that has allowed us to survive. To function in a complex social world, to maintain stable relationships, to pursue long-term goals in the face of setbacks and uncertainty, to get out of bed in the morning despite the knowledge that we will eventually die. All of this requires a certain amount of selective blindness, strategic forgetting, and creative reinterpretation of uncomfortable facts. But here is the paradox that sits at the heart of our journey today. The same mechanism that allows us to function is also the mechanism that imprisons us. The stories we tell ourselves to survive become the walls of our cell. The protective shield of the ego becomes a barrier to genuine connection, to growth, to the kind of transformation that occurs only when we are willing to let something within us die so that something new can be born. So we arrive at our central question, the question that will guide us through every twist and turn of this exploration. How do we wake up from the dream of ourselves? How do we see through the illusions we have worked so hard to maintain? And perhaps most importantly, once we do, who will we be on the other side? The journey ahead will not be easy. We will travel through the dark forests of the unconscious, where Freud and Jung mapped territories of the mind that most people prefer to leave unexplored. We will examine the mechanisms of denial at the neurological level, discovering that our brains are not truth-seeking devices, but survival machines that will sacrifice accuracy for comfort almost every time. We will look at the social dimensions of self-deception, the way our false selves are not merely personal inventions, but are co-created by the cultures we inhabit, the roles we are assigned, and the stories our society tells about who we should be. But we will also find something unexpected. In the deepest chamber of this labyrinth, past the defenses and distortions, past the lies we tell and the truths we cannot speak, there is something waiting. Not the monster you feared, but a strange and luminous presence. Your actual self, the one you have been hiding from, the one you have spent your entire life both seeking and fleeing. The ancient alchemists had a saying, solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. To transform, you must first break down what you think you are. Only then can something new crystallize. This is the promise and the peril of self-knowledge. It destroys before it creates. It strips away before it reveals. Are you ready? Can you hear it already? That quiet voice inside you, the one you have been so careful not to listen to, beginning to whisper? It knows why you are here. It knows what you are hiding from. And it knows, with a certainty that your conscious mind cannot yet accept, that the only way forward is through. The mirror awaits. Step closer. Let us begin. The Archaeology of Illusion. To understand self-deception, we must first travel back, not merely to the beginning of psychology or philosophy, but to the very origins of consciousness itself. We must ask, when did human beings first develop the capacity to lie to themselves? And more intriguingly, why would evolution, that ruthless optimizer, preserve and even enhance such a seemingly maladaptive trait? Imagine, if you will, the moment when self-awareness first flickered into existence in the mind of our distant ancestors. Some scientists place this event around 2 million years ago, others much more recently. But whenever it happened, something unprecedented occurred in the long history of life on Earth. An organism became conscious not only of the world around it, but of itself as a distinct entity within that world. This was not merely an upgrade. It was a revolution. And like all revolutions, it came with profound costs. Before self-awareness, there was no psychological suffering as we know it. A gazelle being chased by a lion experiences fear, but it does not lie awake at night worrying about hypothetical future lion attacks. It does not construct elaborate narratives about why it deserves to be eaten or spend years in therapy working through its childhood trauma of seeing its mother killed. It runs, or it is caught, and that is the extent of its experience. But humans? We inherited the same ancient fear response, the same fight or flight machinery, the same limbic system screaming danger, and then we built on top of it a prefrontal cortex capable of imagining every terrible possibility, of analyzing our own reactions, of judging ourselves for having the wrong emotions, and of creating elaborate stories about what it all means. Self-awareness gave us language, art, culture, technology, and philosophy. It gave us the ability to plan for the future, to learn from the past, to cooperate on unprecedented scales, to create meaning in a universe that offers none. But it also gave us something darker, the ability to be ashamed of ourselves, to feel guilt not just for what we have done, but for what we have thought, to construct an identity and then spend our lives defending it against all evidence that we are not who we think we are. The psychologist Ernest Becker, in his masterwork The Denial of Death, argued that the primary psychological project of every human being is managing the terror of self-awareness. We know we will die. We know we are vulnerable. We know that most of what we do is ultimately meaningless in the vast cosmic scale. And we know that our sense of being a coherent, autonomous self is to a large extent an illusion. Neurons firing in patterns, biochemical reactions, the inherited instincts of 100 million years of evolution dressed up in the costume of individuality. This knowledge is unbearable. It threatens to paralyze us, to collapse the entire structure of meaning we need to function. So the mind, in its infinite creativity, developed a solution. It learned to selectively filter reality, to highlight certain facts and obscure others, to construct narratives that make our lives feel significant, our choices meaningful, our identities solid and real. In other words, the mind learned to lie. But here is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Self-deception is not simply a conscious person telling themselves untrue things. It is far more sophisticated than that. If you consciously know you are lying to yourself, the lie doesn't work. The magic trick is revealed. For self-deception to be effective, it must operate beneath the threshold of awareness. You must genuinely believe the false thing. Your conscious mind must be kept ignorant of what your unconscious mind is doing. This is what Freud meant by repression, not merely forgetting, but an active, ongoing process of keeping certain thoughts and memories out of conscious awareness. And it is what Jung meant when he spoke of the shadow, all the parts of ourselves that we cannot accept, that we disown and project onto others, that we spend enormous energy ensuring we never have to look at directly. Let us journey to Vienna, to the closing years of the 19th century. Sigmund Freud, a young neurologist fascinated by the mysteries of hysteria, begins to notice something strange in his patients. They come to him with physical symptoms, paralysis, blindness, chronic pain, for which there is no physiological explanation. Through hypnosis and later through his revolutionary technique of free association, Freud discovers that these symptoms are not random. They are meaningful. They are the body's way of expressing something that the mind cannot acknowledge. One of his early patients, whom he called Anna O., suffered from a complex array of symptoms including paralysis of her limbs and disturbances of vision and speech. Through treatment, Freud and his colleague Josef Breuer discovered that each symptom had a psychological origin, a traumatic memory or forbidden desire that had been pushed out of consciousness but was nevertheless demanding to be heard. When Anna O was able to speak about these hidden experiences, to bring them into the light of awareness, her symptoms disappeared. She called this process the talking cure. What Freud had stumbled upon was nothing less than the discovery that the mind is divided against itself, that we contain multitudes, and those multitudes are not always in harmony, that there is a part of us that knows things our conscious self cannot or will not acknowledge, and that this split, this fundamental division, is not a pathology afflicting only a few unfortunate individuals. It is the basic structure of human consciousness itself. But Freud's Victorian conservatism limited his vision. He believed that repression primarily concerned sexual and aggressive impulses, the dark desires that civilized society demanded we renounce. What he did not fully appreciate is that we repress far more than our forbidden longings. We repress our gifts as much as our shames. We hide our light as often as our darkness. We deceive ourselves about our capacities for love, for creativity, for courage, just as thoroughly as we deny our capacities for cruelty and cowardice. This is where Carl Jung enters our story, and with him a more expansive vision of self-deception. Jung recognized that the unconscious is not merely a repository for repressed material, but a vast and creative realm with its own intelligence, its own purposes, its own ways of communicating through dreams, symbols, and synchronicities. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, the curated version of ourselves we present to the world. But he understood that the real danger is not simply that we wear masks for others. The danger is that we mistake the mask for our true face. We forget we are performing. The role becomes the actor, and the actual self, what Jung called the self with a capital S, the totality of our being, recedes into shadow, waiting, always waiting, for the moment when we might finally turn around and acknowledge it. He tells a story in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, of a dream he had in which he discovered a hidden floor in his house. Below the living quarters he knew there were older levels, first a medieval chamber, then a Roman cellar, then finally a prehistoric cave with scattered bones and pottery shards. Jung understood this dream as a map of the psyche. Beneath our everyday consciousness lies layer upon layer of history, personal and collective, remembered and forgotten, human and pre-human. Self-deception, in this view, is not merely about hiding uncomfortable truths. It is about the tragedy of living only on the surface level of ourselves, never descending into those deeper chambers where the real treasures and terrors wait. It is about mistaking the persona, that thin layer of identity we have constructed, for the entirety of who we are. But the origins of self-deception go deeper still. Let us travel further back, before Freud and Jung, before the birth of psychology, to the ancient world where these questions were first posed in the language of myth and philosophy. In the allegory of the cave, Plato presents one of the most powerful images of self-deception ever conceived. Prisoners are chained in a cave from birth, facing a wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners see only the shadows and, having known nothing else, believe these shadows are reality itself. They develop complex theories about the shadows, create hierarchies of shadow knowledge, pride themselves on their ability to predict which shadow will appear next. Then one prisoner is freed. He turns around, and the turning itself is agonizing. His neck is stiff from a lifetime of looking in only one direction. He sees the fire, the objects, the people carrying them. He understands for the first time that what he thought was reality was merely a projection. But the story doesn't end there. He is dragged out of the cave entirely, into the sunlight. At first, he is blinded. The light is too much. He wants to return to the comfortable darkness, to the shadows he understood. Only gradually can he adjust to this new way of seeing. Only gradually does he come to recognize that the entire world he knew was a constructed illusion. But here is the tragic twist. When he returns to the cave to free the other prisoners, to tell them what he has seen, they do not believe him. More than that, they hate him for disturbing their reality. They perceive him not as a liberator but as a threat, and Plato tells us chillingly that if they could, they would kill him. This is the dark core of self-deception. We do not merely fail to see the truth, we actively resist it. We attack those who try to show it to us. We have invested so much in our version of reality, our carefully constructed identity, our comfortable illusions, that truth itself becomes the enemy. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche understood this perhaps better than anyone. He wrote, "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you." But he might as well have been talking about the relationship we have with ourselves. Once you recognize that you have been deceiving yourself, once you catch yourself in the act of motivated reasoning or convenient forgetting, a terrible question arises. If I cannot trust my own mind to tell me the truth about myself, what can I trust? Nietzsche's response was not to seek some absolute truth beyond deception, but to acknowledge that we are fundamentally creative creatures, makers of meaning in a meaningless universe. We cannot escape interpretation, cannot step outside our own perspective to see things as they really are. But we can become conscious of our interpretations. We can recognize that we are the authors of our own experience. And in that recognition, there is a kind of freedom, not the freedom of perfect self-knowledge, which may be impossible, but the freedom of creative self-invention, knowing what we are doing as we do it. But even this view, empowering as it may seem, raises troubling questions. If there is no truth, only interpretations, how do we distinguish between useful self-knowledge and comforting self-deception? If we are the authors of our own identity, are we not also the most unreliable narrators imaginable? These questions bring us to a crucial insight. Self-deception is not simply about the content of what we believe about ourselves, whether we think we are brave or cowardly, intelligent or foolish, worthy or unworthy. It is about the very structure of how we know anything at all. It is epistemological, not just psychological. It concerns the foundation of our relationship with reality itself. The contemporary philosopher Thomas Nagel posed a famous thought experiment. What is it like to be a bat? A bat navigates through echolocation, constructing its reality through sound waves bouncing off objects. Can we, as humans who rely primarily on vision, truly understand what the world is like from a bat's perspective? Nagel argued that we cannot, that there is something irreducibly subjective about consciousness, something that cannot be fully translated across the gap between different kinds of minds. But here is the more unsettling corollary. If we cannot fully understand what it is like to be a bat, can we truly understand what it is like to be ourselves? We are trapped within our own subjectivity, looking at ourselves with the same eyes that we are looking from. The observer and the observed are the same. And in that circularity, in that strange loop of self-reference, self-deception finds its home. Modern neuroscience has begun to map the mechanisms of this deception at the level of brain architecture. Studies using fMRI have shown that when people are presented with evidence that contradicts their deeply held beliefs, the areas of the brain associated with rational thought actually become less active, while the areas associated with emotion and identity become more active. The brain, it seems, treats challenges to our beliefs as threats to our physical safety, triggering the same defensive responses as if we were being attacked by a predator. In one particularly revealing study, researchers showed people videos of their own conversations and asked them to evaluate their behavior. What they found was remarkable. People were remarkably good at identifying negative behaviors in others, but almost completely blind to the same behaviors in themselves. Even when watching video evidence of their own actions, they found ways to reinterpret, justify, and explain away what they had done. The camera didn't lie, but their perception of what the camera showed was filtered through layers of self-serving bias and motivated reasoning. This is the fortress of the ego, and it is built on a foundation of denial. Every brick is a rationalization, every tower a carefully constructed narrative, every moat filled with selective memory. And the ego does not simply defend itself passively, it actively seeks out information that confirms what it already believes, avoiding or distorting anything that might threaten its integrity. The psychologist Leon Festinger called this cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension that arises when we hold contradictory beliefs or when our actions don't match our self-concept. Rather than resolving this dissonance by changing our beliefs or acknowledging our contradictions, we typically do something more creative. We change our perception of reality to eliminate the contradiction. The smoker knows cigarettes cause cancer but believes it won't happen to them. The person who considers themselves honest finds ways to justify their dishonesty. The loving parent who screams at their child convinces themselves it was necessary, even beneficial. We are not truth seekers, we are dissonance avoiders. And the smoothest path to avoiding dissonance is self-deception, believing the story that makes our actions coherent, our identity stable, our world comprehensible. But there is another layer to this archaeology of illusion, one that connects us to the very earliest human communities. Self-deception is not merely an individual phenomenon, it is profoundly social. We lie to ourselves in ways that make us acceptable to our tribe, that allow us to maintain our status in our community, that protect us from exile or shame. The anthropologist Robert Trivers has argued that self-deception evolved as a tool for social manipulation. If you are trying to deceive someone else, you will be more convincing if you genuinely believe your own lies. Your body language won't betray you, your voice won't waver, your eyes won't dart away. Self-deception, in this view, makes us better liars to others precisely because we become honest liars to ourselves. Think of the politician who convinces themselves that their corruption is actually serving the public good. The religious leader who believes their sexual abuse is an expression of divine love. The corporate executive who genuinely sees their exploitation as creating value. These are not cynical manipulators, or not merely that. They are true believers in their own false narratives, and that belief makes them far more dangerous than simple liars would be. We have traced the roots of self-deception from the evolutionary emergence of self-awareness, through the unconscious mechanisms discovered by psychoanalysis, back to the ancient philosophical understanding that we live in a cave of our own making, and forward again to the neurological and social structures that maintain our illusions. And everywhere we look, we find the same pattern, the mind divided against itself, consciousness hiding from consciousness, the self that is both deceiver and deceived. But this is only the beginning. We have mapped the territory. Now we must journey into it. In the next phase of our exploration, we will confront the mechanisms of denial in their full operation, the specific strategies and techniques the mind uses to hide truth from itself, the crises these strategies create, and the moment when the entire structure begins to collapse, when the walls of the cave start to crumble and we catch our first glimpse of something beyond. The descent awaits, the shadows are gathering, and in the darkness, something is stirring, something that knows you better than you know yourself, something that has been waiting for this moment, for this recognition, for this first step toward an awakening that cannot be undone. Let us continue. The architecture of denial. We stand now at the gates of the fortress. We have traced its origins, understood its evolutionary purpose, mapped its philosophical and psychological dimensions. But to truly comprehend self-deception, we must enter the fortress itself. We must examine the specific mechanisms, the intricate machinery, the day-to-day operations of how the mind hides truth from itself, and we must confront the crisis that this hiding creates, not just in individual lives, but in the collective psychology of our species. Because we live in an age where denial has become not merely a personal affliction, but a global emergency. Climate catastrophe unfolds while we scroll past the warnings. Inequality deepens while we tell ourselves we live in meritocracies. Loneliness epidemic spreads while we curate images of perfect connection. Technology reshapes human consciousness while we pretend we remain unchanged. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, let us understand the tools of denial, the techniques of self-deception. Let us become, for a moment, architects of our own illusions. The first mechanism, rationalization. You know this one intimately, though you may not have named it. It is the voice that comes after the action, explaining why what you did was not only acceptable but necessary, perhaps even admirable. It is the internal lawyer, and it never loses a case. You snapped at your child, but they needed to learn. You lied on your resume, but everyone does it, and you could do the job anyway. You didn't call your aging parent, but you've been so busy, and wouldn't they just complain anyway? You scrolled through social media for hours, but you needed to decompress, and besides, you're staying informed. Rationalization transforms our weaknesses into reasonable responses, our selfishness into self-care, our cruelty into necessary toughness. It is the alchemy of the ego, turning the lead of our failures into the gold of justified behavior. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves about our own freedom and responsibility. He gives the example of a woman on a date whose companion takes her hand. She faces a choice: acknowledge the sexual dimension of this gesture and make a decision about whether to reciprocate or withdraw. But instead, she lets her hand rest in his as if it were an independent object, as if she had nothing to do with it, as if no decision were being made. She pretends to be a thing rather than a free consciousness, thereby avoiding the anxiety and responsibility of choosing. We do this constantly. We pretend our choices are not choices, but inevitabilities. We act as if we had no option, as if circumstances forced our hand, as if we were merely responding to external pressures, rather than actively creating our reality through the accumulation of 1,000 small decisions. The second mechanism, projection. Here the mind performs a magic trick so audacious it would be funny if it weren't so tragic. The qualities we cannot accept in ourselves, the anger, the desire, the pettiness, the prejudice, are seen instead in others. The person who is judgmental cannot stop talking about how judgmental everyone else is. The one who is unfaithful becomes obsessed with their partner's loyalty. The one who lies sees deception everywhere. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." He meant this literally. The people who trigger us most strongly are often mirrors, showing us what we have disowned in ourselves. This is the shadow in action, not merely the dark parts we hide, but the act of hiding itself, which requires that we relocate those parts outside ourselves, into the world, into other people, where we can see them clearly precisely because we don't recognize them as our own. Political and social conflicts are often shadow projections writ large. One tribe sees another as barbaric, uncivilized, dangerous, and fails to recognize these same qualities in their own history, their own actions, their own hearts. The dynamic is ancient, But in our interconnected age, with weapons of unprecedented destructive power and media ecosystems designed to amplify outrage, projection has become one of the most dangerous mechanisms of self-deception humanity possesses. The third mechanism, compartmentalization. This is the art of keeping contradictory beliefs in separate mental containers, ensuring they never meet, never confront each other, never force us to resolve the contradiction. The devout religious person who acts ruthlessly in business, the environmentalist who flies frequently, the person who believes in equality but clutches their purse tighter when a person of color walks by, the parent who loves their children but cannot stop prioritizing work, the doctor who smokes, the therapist who cannot manage their own relationships. We are all experts at this. We maintain elaborate systems of psychological partitions, ensuring that what we believe in one domain of life never quite connects with how we behave in another. The psychologist Robert J. Lifton, studying the Nazi doctors who participated in genocide while maintaining their identities as healers, called this doubling, the creation of multiple selves that can operate independently, each with its own logic, its own ethics, its own reality. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of self-deception because it doesn't require that we disbelieve facts or memories. We can acknowledge everything. Yes, I said I would change. Yes, this contradicts my values. Yes, I promised myself never again, and yet feel no pressing need to resolve the contradictions. The compartments keep them safely separated, like volatile chemicals stored in different containers, never allowed to mix and react. The fourth mechanism, selective attention and memory. The mind is not a camera recording reality objectively. It is a storyteller, and every storyteller knows that what you leave out is as important as what you include. We pay attention to evidence that confirms what we already believe and somehow fail to notice evidence that contradicts it. This is called confirmation bias, and it operates not through any conscious decision to ignore inconvenient facts, but through the pre-conscious filtering of what even reaches our awareness. Memory is even more malleable. Every time we remember something, we are not retrieving a fixed recording, but reconstructing an experience. And in that reconstruction, we subtly alter it to fit our current needs, our current self-image. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has demonstrated how easily false memories can be implanted, how readily we confabulate details, how confidently we remember things that never happened. But we don't need others to manipulate our memories. We do it ourselves, constantly. That argument with your partner? You remember it one way, they remember it completely differently, and both of you are absolutely certain of your version. That moment of courage or cowardice in your past. Each time you revisit it, the story shifts slightly, emphasizing different aspects, interpreting motives differently, until the memory has been polished smooth, fitting perfectly into the larger narrative of who you think you are. We are unreliable narrators of our own lives, and we cannot help but be. The past exists only as we remember it, and we remember it only as we need it to have been. The fifth mechanism, displacement and sublimation. Sometimes the emotion or desire is too strong to simply repress, but too threatening to acknowledge directly. So the psyche redirects it, displacing it onto safer targets or sublimating it into acceptable forms. The person angry at their boss yells at their spouse. The one terrified of death becomes a daredevil. The sexual desire that cannot be acknowledged becomes religious fervor or artistic obsession. The rage at your father becomes a passionate commitment to social justice. The grief you cannot process becomes a chronic physical pain. Freud saw sublimation as one of the highest achievements of civilization, the channeling of base instincts into creative, productive, socially valuable work. But he also recognized the cost. The original desire remains unfulfilled, the original wound unhealed. The displacement is not a solution but a symptom, a compromise formation between what we want and what we allow ourselves to want. The sixth mechanism, gaslighting ourselves. We have borrowed this term from interpersonal abuse, But we do to ourselves what the worst relationships do. We make ourselves doubt our own perceptions, memories, and sanity. You felt hurt by something someone said, but maybe you're too sensitive. You had an intuition that something was wrong, but you're probably just paranoid. You wanted to pursue that dream, but that's not realistic. You need to be practical. You felt alive doing that thing, but that's selfish. You should prioritize responsibilities. Over time, this internal gaslighting creates a profound disconnection from our own experience. We no longer know what we actually feel versus what we think we should feel. We cannot distinguish between genuine intuition and irrational anxiety. We lose access to the truth of our own desires, our own perceptions, our own inner knowing. This is perhaps the cruelest form of self-deception because it doesn't just hide specific truths, it damages our capacity to recognize truth at all. It severs us from the only instrument we have for navigating reality, our own experience. Now, having enumerated these mechanisms, we must ask, why? Why has evolution, that ruthless optimizer for survival and reproduction, preserved and refined these elaborate systems for self-deception? If truth is adaptive, if accurate perception of reality helps us navigate it successfully, why are we so profoundly designed to lie to ourselves? The answer, disturbing as it may be, is that self-deception is adaptive. In certain contexts, under certain conditions, believing false things about yourself makes you more successful at reproduction, at social status, at survival itself. Consider confidence. Study after study has shown that moderate self-deception about one's abilities, what psychologists call illusory superiority, or the better-than-average effect, is correlated with better mental health, greater motivation, and even better performance on some tasks. People who have slightly inflated views of their competence try harder, persist longer, and appear more attractive to potential mates and collaborators. Meanwhile, people with accurate self-assessments, those who see their limitations clearly, show higher rates of anxiety and depression. This is the terrible irony. Realistic self-knowledge can be psychologically debilitating. The person who sees themselves accurately may see too much, may become paralyzed by the recognition of their ordinariness, their mortality, the essential meaninglessness of existence. While the person with a slightly inflated ego, protected by layers of self-serving bias, marches forward with confidence, accomplishes goals, attracts partners, passes on their genes. But there is a threshold. Too much self-deception becomes maladaptive. The person so divorced from reality that they cannot accurately assess risks, cannot learn from feedback, cannot adjust their strategies, this person eventually pays a price. Natural selection, it seems, has tuned us to a sweet spot. Enough self-deception to maintain motivation and avoid existential despair, but not so much that we lose touch with reality entirely. This is the balancing act every human being performs, usually unconsciously. How much truth can I afford to know? How much delusion do I need to function? Where is the line between healthy denial and destructive dissociation? And here we arrive at the crisis, the conflict that gives this act its shape. Because while self-deception may have been adaptive in the ancestral environment, in small tribes where social cohesion mattered more than technical accuracy, where having a slightly inflated sense of your abilities might make the difference in a status competition or a life-threatening challenge, we no longer live in that world. We live in a world of complex systems and existential risks, where collective denial can lead to species-level catastrophes. We live in a world where technology amplifies both our capabilities and our self-deceptions, where AI and social media can trap us in echo chambers so sophisticated that reality itself becomes optional, where we can curate our entire information environment to confirm our existing beliefs. The climate scientist Michael E. Mann has spoken about the cognitive dissonance required to study climate change, to know with scientific certainty that we are driving toward civilizational collapse, and yet to get up every morning, to maintain hope, to continue working, to not be paralyzed by despair. He describes a kind of necessary compartmentalization, to know the truth in one part of his mind while keeping it at bay in another, just enough to remain functional. But this is the microcosm of our species' situation. We know. At some level, we all know. We know the planet is heating. We know inequality is unsustainable. We know our consumption patterns are destroying the biosphere. We know our attention is being harvested and sold. We know our political systems are captured by wealth. We know, we know, we know. And yet we persist in the behaviors that maintain these systems, not because we are stupid or evil, but because the mechanisms of denial, rationalization, compartmentalization, projection, selective attention, operate automatically beneath conscious control, protecting us from truths too large and terrible to bear. The philosopher Timothy Morton has coined the term hyperobject to describe phenomena like climate change, things so massively distributed in time and space that they defeat normal modes of comprehension and response. You cannot see climate change the way you can see a predator. It is everywhere and nowhere, happening now and always, undeniable in its effects yet invisible in its totality. Our psychological machinery, evolved for immediate threats, freezes in the face of hyperobjects. The same denial mechanisms that helped our ancestors ignore their eventual death now help us ignore the death of our climate, our democracy, our collective future. And because we cannot see the threat clearly, cannot feel it viscerally, the machinery of self-deception keeps running, keeps us comfortable, keeps us shopping and scrolling and maintaining the routines of normalcy even as the foundations crumble. But the crisis is not only collective, it is profoundly personal. Because while we have been exploring the mechanisms of self-deception in abstract, you, yes you, listening to these words, you know there is something in your own life that you are not looking at, some truth you have been avoiding, some choice you have been deferring, some knowing that lives in your body, but that you will not allow into conscious thought. Maybe it is about a relationship that has been over for years, but you cannot admit it. Maybe it is about work that drains your soul, but you tell yourself it's temporary, just until you have enough saved, just until the kids are older, just until the next promotion, always pushing the moment of reckoning into an ever-receding future. Maybe it is about an addiction you do not call an addiction, a family pattern you swore you would never repeat but find yourself enacting, a dream you have buried so deep that you have almost convinced yourself it was never real. The poet David Whyte writes of the conversation you have been avoiding all your life. Every person has one. It is the conversation with yourself, the one where you admit what you actually want, what you actually feel, what you actually need. It is the conversation where you stop performing, stop defending, stop justifying, and simply tell the truth. But that conversation is terrifying, because once you admit the truth, you cannot unknow it. Once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. And seeing clearly often means you must change, must leave, or stay, or speak, or act in ways that will alter everything. The known misery often feels safer than the unknown freedom. This is the heart of the conflict. We are trapped between the need to know ourselves and the terror of what we might discover, between the adaptation that denial offers and the transformation that truth demands, between the comfortable prison of our constructed identity and the vertiginous freedom of authentic being. And so we linger at this threshold. We approach the truth and retreat. We glimpse our own reflection in an unguarded moment and quickly look away. We sense the contradiction, feel the dissonance, and then, with a skill honed over a lifetime, we perform the psychological sleight of hand that makes it disappear. But the universe is not cooperating with our denial. Reality, as Philip K. Dick said, is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. The climate doesn't care about our rationalizations. Our bodies don't care about our stories. Time doesn't stop while we gather courage. The people we love will not wait forever. Death doesn't negotiate, and so the crisis intensifies. The walls of the cave begin to crack. The fortress of the ego, so carefully constructed, starts to show its weaknesses. the mechanisms of denial pushed too far, begin to break down. And in those cracks, in those moments of breakdown, something else becomes possible. This is the darkest hour. This is the moment when all your defenses have been activated, when the mind throws everything it has at maintaining the illusion, and when, despite all of that, reality begins to break through. In the psychological literature, this is sometimes called the dark night of the soul. In addiction recovery, it is hitting bottom. In spiritual traditions, it is ego death. In psychoanalysis, it is crisis. But regardless of the terminology, the structure is the same. The old self, the false self, the defended self must die before something new can be born. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But what he understood, what the entire depth psychology tradition understands, is that this pain is not the end of the story. It is the birth canal. It is the dark through which we must travel to reach a new dawn. The question that haunts this moment is, do we have the courage, not just as individuals facing our private demons, but as a species facing collective truths? Do we have the courage to stop, to look, to really see what we have been fleeing from? Do we have the capacity to sit with the discomfort, to resist the immediate urge to return to our comfortable illusions, to bear the weight of reality without the protective buffer of denial? Because here is what the philosophers and psychologists and spiritual teachers across traditions agree on. You cannot heal what you cannot feel. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. You cannot transcend what you deny. The shadows are gathering now, pressing against the walls of your awareness. The thing you have been avoiding is closer than it has ever been. Your own voice, the one you have been shouting down for years, is growing louder. Can you hear it? Can you feel the trembling in your hands, the tightness in your chest, the way your attention wants to flee to anything else? The news, the phone, the next task, the next distraction. This is the moment. This is always the moment. And the only way out is through. We stand at the precipice. Below us, the darkness. Behind us, the dying world of our illusions. And ahead, barely visible, a light that grows brighter as we step toward it. The light of what might be possible if we were brave enough to see. The awakening calls. And we must answer. Breaking the spell. There is a moment that every person who has ever awakened from a deep deception can remember. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in an ordinary moment, washing dishes, driving home from work, lying in bed unable to sleep. But when it comes, it changes everything. It is the moment when you see, not think, not reason, not gradually come to understand, but suddenly, completely, irrevocably see the way things actually are, stripped of the stories, the justifications, the careful editing you have been performing. For a moment, the defenses drop, the compartments dissolve, and reality breaks through in its raw, unmediated fullness. The Buddhist traditions call this satori or kensho, a sudden glimpse of your true nature. In Christianity, it is metanoia, the transformation of mind and heart. In psychoanalysis, it is insight. In common language, it is simply, oh God, how did I not see this before? But here is what is not often spoken about these moments of awakening. They are not pleasant. The truth does not feel like relief, not at first. It feels like devastation. It feels like the bottom dropping out. It feels like everything you thought you knew about yourself was a lie, and now you are standing in the ruins of your own identity, with no idea who you actually are. The developmental psychologist Robert Kegan describes stages of consciousness as successive layers of what we are subject to versus what we can take as object. When we are subject to something, an emotion, a belief, a role, an identity, we cannot see it because we are it. We look through it like a pair of glasses we don't know we're wearing. But when we develop the capacity to take it as object, to hold it at arm's length and observe it, we suddenly have choice. We are no longer possessed by it. We possess it. The movement from self-deception to self-awareness is precisely this shift. What you were subject to, what you couldn't see because you were looking from it, suddenly becomes visible. And in that visibility, everything changes. Let us trace this awakening through its stages, understanding that these are not neat, linear progressions, but spirals, repetitions, movements back and forth between seeing and unseeing. Stage 1. The first crack. It begins with dissonance. Something doesn't fit. A moment of confusion when your story doesn't quite match the evidence. A comment from someone else that lands wrong, that you can't quite dismiss. A dream that disturbs you for reasons you can't name. A physical symptom, the panic attack, the chronic pain, the inexplicable fatigue that won't respond to the usual treatments. This is your psyche trying to get your attention. This is the truth you have repressed, attempting to break through. But at first you don't recognize it as such. You experience it as a problem to be solved, a symptom to be managed. You try harder with the old strategies, rationalize more elaborately, compartmentalize more thoroughly, project more aggressively. But the dissonance grows, the crack widens, and there comes a moment when the old defenses simply fail. They stop working. The rationalization sounds hollow even to you. The compartments collapse into each other. The projection becomes obvious, and you are left standing in that uncomfortable space between the illusion you can no longer maintain and the truth you have not yet fully grasped. This is the liminal zone. The anthropologist Victor Turner called it betwixt and between, the space of ritual transformation where you are no longer who you were, but not yet who you will become. It is profoundly uncomfortable. Every instinct screams to return to the known, even if the known is painful. But something, grace, desperation, exhaustion, or perhaps simply timing, allows you to stay, to not flee, to bear the unbearable uncertainty. Stage 2. The descent. You have heard the call. The defenses have weakened. Now begins the real work, the deliberate excavation of what you have buried. This is where therapy, meditation, journaling, deep conversation with trusted others, or sometimes psychedelics or crisis or grief, these are the tools that allow you to go deeper, to ask the questions you have been avoiding, to sit with the feelings you have been fleeing, to remember the memories you have been suppressing. It is painful. Make no mistake about that. There is a reason you buried these things. The shame, the grief, the rage, the fear, they are enormous. To feel them fully, to let them move through you without the protective mechanisms that have kept them at bay, requires a kind of courage that our culture rarely acknowledges or honors. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love." This is the alchemy that happens in the descent. The thing you have been running from, when you finally turn and face it, transforms. Not because it changes, but because your relationship to it changes. When you stop resisting it, when you stop denying it, when you can hold it with compassion rather than judgment, it loses its power to control you from the shadows. The Jungian analyst James Hollis asks a powerful question. What is seeking to live through me that I will not allow? What if the addiction, the symptom, the repetitive pattern, the thing that keeps sabotaging your happiness, what if it is not the enemy but the messenger? What if it is your psyche's way of trying to get you to pay attention to something you need to integrate, some part of yourself that has been exiled and is demanding to come home? This is the insight that shifts everything. Your symptoms are not malfunctions. They are communications. Your defenses are not failures of character. They were adaptive strategies in impossible situations. And the truth you have been hiding from is not a monster, but a mirror, showing you not what is wrong with you, but what you need to become whole. Stage 3. The meeting. Eventually, if you persist in the descent, you arrive at what Jung called the encounter with the shadow. This is not metaphorical. In dreams, in active imagination, sometimes even in waking life, you meet the other, the part of yourself you have disowned. It might appear as a figure you despise. It might wear the face of someone who hurt you, revealing how you have internalized their cruelty and now perpetuate it against yourself. It might appear as an animal, a child, a stranger. But you will know it by one unmistakable quality. It will feel both completely foreign and unnervingly familiar. The first impulse is to fight it, to defeat it, to banish it once more. But this is the old strategy, and it will not work. The shadow cannot be destroyed. It can only be integrated, and integration requires something radical. You must listen to it. You must acknowledge its grievances. You must recognize that this part of you, however ugly or frightening, has been carrying something important, a quality, a capacity, a truth that the conscious ego could not bear, but that you need to be whole. This is the marriage of opposites, the conjunctio of alchemy, the reconciliation of the divided self. It is not comfortable. It involves owning the parts of you that you have projected onto others. It involves recognizing that you are capable of the very things you have judged most harshly. It involves accepting that you are not the hero of your own story in the simple way you imagined, but something far more complex, contradictory, and human. But in this acceptance, something miraculous happens. Energy that was locked in the maintenance of the division, the exhausting work of keeping the shadow at bay, becomes available. Qualities that were hidden in the shadow, sometimes positive qualities, gifts you were afraid to claim, emerge. You become more real, more present, more alive. Stage 4. The integration. Now you are faced with a challenge that is both simple and impossibly difficult. You must live what you have learned. You must bring the insights from the depths back into the surface world. You must integrate the truth you have discovered into your actual life, your relationships, your work, your choices. This is where many awakenings falter, because insight without action is just another form of denial. Understanding why you have a pattern is not the same as changing the pattern. Seeing your self-deception clearly does not automatically free you from it. Integration requires practice. It requires what the Buddhists call right action, the behavioral expression of inner understanding. It requires awkward conversations. It requires setting boundaries you have never set before. It requires saying no to things that once defined you and yes to things that terrify you. It requires, fundamentally, living in alignment with what you now know to be true rather than what is comfortable or familiar. The psychologist Carl Rogers spoke of congruence, the alignment between inner experience and outer expression, between who you are and who you present yourself as being. Congruence is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It is a practice, a constant recalibration, a daily choosing of truth over convenience. And here is the deeper challenge. Integration is not a solo project. You do not exist in isolation. You are embedded in relationships, communities, systems, and those systems have invested in your old self. They have assigned you roles. They have expectations. And when you begin to change, when you begin to live more authentically, you will encounter resistance. Your family may be threatened by your transformation because it destabilizes the entire family system. Your friends may drift away because you no longer play the role they were comfortable with. Your workplace may resist the new boundaries you are setting. Even your own body, so used to the old patterns of stress and defense, may rebel against the new way of being. This is the dark night that comes after the dark night. The realization that awakening is not an event, but a commitment. That you must choose, moment by moment, to remain conscious when it would be so much easier to slip back into the comfortable unconsciousness. That the path forward requires ongoing courage, not just the heroic courage of the initial breakthrough, but the quiet, persistent courage of daily practice. Stage 5. The return. In Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the final and most important stage is the return, bringing the treasure, the wisdom, the gift back to the community. The hero who refuses to return, who stays in the cave of enlightenment, is not complete. The transformation is not for the individual alone, but for the collective. This is where personal awakening connects to collective transformation. Because the truth is, we do not just have individual minds that happen to be deceiving themselves. We have a collective consciousness, and it is deeply, systematically, catastrophically self-deceived. Our economic system is based on the delusion of infinite growth on a finite planet. Our political systems are based on the delusion that we are primarily competing individuals rather than profoundly interdependent beings. Our technological systems are based on the delusion that consciousness can be reduced to computation, that connection can be optimized through interfaces, that meaning can be commodified and sold. These are not just bad ideas. They are manifestations of the same mechanisms of denial we have been exploring at the individual level, now operating at civilization scale. And they are leading us with accelerating velocity toward collapse. But here is the possibility that emerges when we understand self-deception not as a personal failing, but as a species-level challenge. Every individual who awakens, who breaks through their own denials and learns to live with greater consciousness, contributes to a shift in the collective field. Every person who stops projecting their shadow and begins to integrate it removes a small amount of shadow material from the collective unconscious. Every act of genuine self-awareness is a prayer for the awakening of all. This is not mysticism, it is ecology. We are not separate selves but nodes in a vast network of consciousness. The boundaries between self and other, between individual and collective, are more permeable than we imagine. And transformation, when it is genuine, ripples outward in ways we cannot fully track or control. The physicist David Bohm spoke of the implicate order, the underlying wholeness from which the explicate, manifest world unfolds. At the level of the implicate order, there is no separation. Every particle is connected to every other particle, every thought affects the field, and every movement toward greater coherence, greater consciousness, greater truth contributes to the evolution of the whole. What if your awakening matters not just for your own life, but for the species? What if the work you do to see yourself clearly, to integrate your shadow, to live with greater authenticity, is actually, genuinely, cosmically significant? Not because you are special, but because we are all interconnected, and every increase in consciousness anywhere is an increase in consciousness everywhere. This is the vision that has animated mystics, activists, and depth psychologists throughout history. That personal transformation and collective transformation are not separate projects, but two aspects of the same evolutionary impulse. That the path to saving the world runs directly through the work of saving yourself, not from the world, but for it. The permanent revolution. But we must end with a sobering truth. Awakening is not permanent. Consciousness is not a state you achieve, but a practice you maintain. You will forget. You will fall back into unconsciousness. You will catch yourself mid-lie, telling yourself the same old stories. You will find new, more sophisticated forms of self-deception to replace the old ones. This is not failure. This is the nature of the work. The mind will always try to go back to sleep. The ego will always try to rebuild its fortress, and you will always need to choose again to stay awake. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah said, "You are the Buddha and you are the one who should be practicing. There is nowhere else to look." This is the heart of it. You are both the one who is asleep and the one who is awake. You are the deceiver and the one who sees through the deception. And the work is not to eliminate one and perfect the other, but to hold both with awareness, with compassion, with humor even. Because here is the final liberating truth. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to achieve some state of permanent enlightenment where you never again fall into self-deception. You just have to be willing to see again and again whenever you catch yourself in the lie. You just have to maintain what the Buddhists call beginner's mind, the willingness to not know, to question, to remain open to the possibility that everything you think you understand might be partial, distorted, or completely wrong. This is the freedom that comes not from escaping the human condition, but from accepting it fully, from recognizing that self-deception is part of how the mind works, and then choosing, consciously, to notice when it's happening and gently, persistently, bring yourself back to what is true. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Every moment of awakening begins with the willingness to feel the wound, the hurt, the shame, the fear you have been fleeing. And in that willingness, in that openness, light enters. Not the harsh light of judgment, but the soft light of awareness. The light that sees without condemning, that understands without excusing, that transforms simply by being present. This is what lies on the other side of denial. Not a perfect, pain-free existence, but a real one. Not the polished story you have been telling yourself, but the raw, messy, beautiful truth of your actual experience. Not the you thought you should be, but the you actually are, flawed, contradictory, struggling, and yet in some mysterious way, exactly who you need to be. The mirror no longer lies. And in its honest reflection, you see not just your limitations, but your possibility. Not just who you have been, but who you might become. The awakening is not an ending, it is a beginning, and it is available in every moment to anyone willing to look. The choice that remains. We have traveled far together, you and I, through the labyrinth of the mind, through the archaeology of illusion, through the mechanisms of denial and the crisis they create, into the dark night of awakening and the slow dawn of integration. And now we stand here, at the end of this journey and the beginning of yours. Because everything I have shared with you, every psychological insight, every philosophical reflection, every story of transformation, all of it means nothing unless you choose to apply it to yourself. Unless you take the question seriously. Where am I lying to myself right now? What am I not looking at? What truth am I fleeing? This is not an abstract, theoretical question. This is the most practical, urgent question you can ask. Because your life, the one you are actually living, not the one you are imagining or planning or remembering, your life is happening now in this moment, and it is being shaped by stories that may or may not be true. The future of our species may well depend on our collective ability to wake up from the dream of separation, from the delusion that we can continue on our current path without consequences, from the denial that allows us to know what we are doing to the planet, to each other, to ourselves, and yet persist in doing it. But that collective awakening can only happen one person at a time, and it starts with you. You have a choice right now, in this moment. You can close this video, return to your life, and let these words fade into the background hum of information you consume and forget. You can file this under interesting ideas and change nothing. The mechanisms of denial are already preparing their counter-arguments, their rationalizations for why this doesn't really apply to you, why you're different, why you'll think about it later. Or you can pause. You can sit with the discomfort of not knowing. You can ask yourself the hard questions and, this is the crucial part, you can listen for the answers that arise not from your conscious mind, but from somewhere deeper, from the body, from the dreams, from the quiet voice that speaks in the spaces between thoughts. You can begin the work, not tomorrow, not when the circumstances are right, not when you feel ready, now. The poet Mary Oliver asks, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I am asking you, what is it you are not doing with it because you are afraid? What truth are you avoiding because it would require change? What gift are you hiding because you were told it wasn't valuable? What wound are you protecting because you fear it would consume you if you touched it? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations. They are the beginning of the conversation you have been avoiding all your life. And here is what I can promise you. If you engage with these questions honestly, if you have the courage to look at what you have been hiding from, if you can bear the discomfort of the space between who you have been and who you might become, you will discover something astonishing. You will discover that you are larger than you imagined, that your capacity for change, for growth, for transformation is far greater than the small defended self has been willing to believe, that the very thing you have been most afraid of, the truth about yourself, is not your doom, but your liberation. You will discover that you are not alone, that the struggle with self-deception is not a personal failing, but a universal human condition, and that every person who has ever awakened has had to walk this same path, through the fear, through the doubt, through the dark night, into the new dawn. You will discover that the meaning you have been seeking is not somewhere out there, waiting to be found, but here, now, in the work of becoming real, in the practice of showing up to your life with honesty, with presence, with the willingness to see and be seen. The ancient mystery schools taught that there are two kinds of death: the death of the body, which is inevitable, and the death of the false self, which is chosen. The first death comes for all of us, but the second death, the dissolution of the ego, the release of the carefully constructed identity, the surrender of the need to be right, to be special, to be in control, this death must be undertaken voluntarily, and most people, the mystics tell us, will do anything to avoid it. But you have listened this far. Something in you is ready, or at least curious. Something in you recognizes the truth in these words, even if it frightens you. Something in you knows that the life you are living, whatever its comforts and accomplishments, is not yet the fullness of what is possible. So let me leave you with this. The mirror is before you, the ancient mirror, the one that shows not just who you pretend to be, but who you actually are. All you have to do is look, really look, without the protective filters, without the familiar stories, without the desperate need to turn away. What do you see? And more importantly, what will you do with what you see? The sleep of the mind is ending. The false dawn of easy answers and comfortable lies is giving way to the real dawn, the difficult dawn, the dawn that demands everything and offers in return only the truth. But that truth, your truth, the specific, irreplaceable truth of your life, is worth everything. It is worth the fear, the uncertainty, the inevitable discomfort of transformation. It is worth it because it is yours, because it is real, because it is the only thing you actually have. The ancients are calling, across the millennia, with their questions and their wisdom. Socrates still asks, "Know thyself." Jung still warns, "Make the unconscious conscious." The Buddha still teaches, "Wake up." And you? What will you answer? The echo returns, and it carries, faintly but unmistakably, the sound of your own voice, speaking a truth you have always known but have never quite dared to say out loud. Listen. The time for sleep is over. The awakening begins now. And in the silence that follows, in the space between these words and whatever comes next in your life, make a choice. Make the choice that matters. Make the choice to see. The journey continues, and it has only just begun.